You don't have a reservation. David Sterling's sharp voice cut through the elegant ambiance of Stella's, one of New York City's most prestigious restaurants. The restaurant manager strode purposefully across the marble-floored entrance, his polished shoes clicking with authority as he approached the black couple waiting near the host stand. David had built his reputation on maintaining what he called the restaurant's exclusivity, and he was convinced that the couple before him didn't belong in this world of $500 dinners and celebrity clientele. But David had no idea who he was really confronting. The man he was about to humiliate, Marcus Thompson, was the secret owner of Stella's, having purchased the struggling establishment 3 years ago and transformed it into the culinary destination it had become. Marcus had chosen to remain anonymous, working behind the scenes while allowing the existing management team to run daily operations. Tonight, he was simply trying to enjoy a quiet anniversary dinner with his wife, Sarah. Marcus looked up from the reservation book he'd been casually glancing at, his expression calm but alert. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from years of building a restaurant empire from the ground up. His well-tailored navy suit and understated elegance spoke of success, but David saw only what his prejudices allowed him to see. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice steady and controlled, the same tone he used when negotiating million-dollar deals with investors. David stepped closer, emboldened by what he interpreted as confusion. He was a thin man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and a permanent sneer that he wore like a badge of authority. "I said you don't have a reservation. Stella's operates on an exclusive reservation system. We don't accommodate walk-ins, especially during peak hours." Marcus glanced at his wife Sarah, who squeezed his hand gently, a silent reminder to stay calm. She was an elegant woman in her early 40s, wearing a beautiful emerald dress that complemented her warm brown skin. They had been married for 15 years and had weathered many storms together, but Sarah could see the familiar tension building in her husband's jaw. "I see," Marcus said calmly. "And you're certain we don't have a reservation?" "Quite certain," David replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "Our reservations are booked months in advance. We cater to a very specific clientele, people who understand fine dining culture and can appreciate what Stella's represents." The coded language wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd heard it before, in different contexts, but the meaning was always the same. He looked around the restaurant he'd poured his heart and soul into, noting the soft lighting, the carefully curated artwork, the servers gliding between tables with practiced precision. "And what exactly does Stella's represent?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Excellence, sophistication, standards," David said, crossing his arms. "We've worked very hard to build a reputation, and we can't compromise that by letting just anyone walk in off the street." Just anyone. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus had started his journey in the food industry, washing dishes in a small diner in Brooklyn. He'd worked his way up through every position, from line cook to sous chef, from assistant manager to general manager. He'd saved every penny, taken out loans, risked everything to open his first restaurant. When that succeeded, he'd expanded, building a network of establishments across the city. Stella's was his crown jewel, the culmination of decades of hard work and sacrifice. "I understand the importance of maintaining standards," Marcus said quietly. "Perhaps you could check the reservation system one more time?" The name would be Thompson. David made a show of glancing at the host stand, though he didn't actually check anything. "As I said, we're completely booked. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the establishments in, let's say, a different neighborhood." Sarah's grip on Marcus's hand tightened. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the signs. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his shoulders. Marcus was a patient man, but he had limits. "Different neighborhood," Marcus repeated, his voice remaining level. "Could you be more specific about what you mean by that?" David looked around nervously, suddenly aware that other guests and staff members were beginning to notice the conversation. The couple at the bar had turned to watch, and one of the servers had slowed her pace to listen. "I simply mean that Stella's has a very particular atmosphere," David said, lowering his voice but not his arrogance. "We've cultivated a specific experience for our clientele, and, frankly, I'm not sure this would be the right fit for someone like, well, people like you." "People like you?" There it was, the naked prejudice wrapped in polite restaurant speak. Marcus pulled out his phone, a gesture that made David stiffen slightly. "Perhaps I should call someone who can help clarify the situation." "Your reservation service?" David asked with a slight smirk. "I'm afraid this isn't something that can be resolved by making a phone call." Marcus didn't respond to the provocation. Instead, he dialed a number from memory and waited. When someone answered, he spoke clearly enough for David and the gathering staff to hear. "This is Marcus Thompson. I'm at Stella's, and there seems to be some confusion about my reservation. Could you check with management about the Thompson party for tonight?" David's confident expression began to waver. Management? How would this man have a direct line to management? Marcus continued his call. "Yes, I'll hold." He looked at David while waiting. "They're checking with the owner about my reservation status." The color began draining from David's face. "Owner? What owner?" As far as David knew, Stella's was owned by some corporation, and he'd never met anyone claiming to be the actual owner. "Was it our clothes?" Sarah continued, her voice gentle but pointed. "Because my dress is Valentino, and my husband's suit is Tom Ford. Was it our demeanor? Because we've been nothing but polite. Or was it something else entirely?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but understood by everyone present. Marcus stepped in before David could dig himself deeper. "Sarah, I think David is beginning to understand the situation." He turned back to the manager. "David, in your 2 years here, how would you say you've been performing?" I thought I was doing well," David said quietly. "The reviews have been good. Revenue is up. We've maintained our reputation." "All true," Marcus agreed. "But there's been something troubling me lately. Several complaints from customers about feeling unwelcome, about being treated differently based on their appearance. I've been trying to identify the source of these issues." David's face went white. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Marcus said. "But first, let me ask you something. Do you see that couple at table 12? David glanced over to where a young interracial couple was dining. "Yes, sir." 2 weeks ago, they called to complain that they felt discriminated against during their visit. The woman said someone made her feel like she didn't belong in a place like this. Would you happen to know anything about that? David's silence was answer enough. "And the family that was here last month? The Washingtons?" They had a similar experience, made to feel unwelcome despite having a confirmed reservation. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed David a series of reviews. These are all from the past 6 months. Different customers, different dates, but a common theme. People feeling judged and unwelcome based on their race. David read the reviews, his face growing paler with each one. "Now," Marcus continued, "I want you to think carefully about your answer to this question. Do you believe that the treatment my wife and I received tonight was appropriate for any customer, regardless of who they are?" David looked around the restaurant, suddenly aware that every eye was on him. Staff members, customers, even the sommelier had emerged from the wine cellar to watch. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. No, sir. It was completely inappropriate. And why was it inappropriate? Because everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their background or appearance. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the correct answer, David. But it took you being confronted by the owner to arrive at it. What does that tell you about your judgment? David had no answer. Marcus looked around the restaurant, addressing not just David, but the entire staff. Let me be very clear about something. This restaurant was built on the principle that exceptional food and service should be available to anyone who can afford it and chooses to dine here. Race, religion, background, none of that matters. What matters is treating every guest like they belong. Because if they're here, they do belong. He turned back to David. Unfortunately, your behavior tonight, and apparently on previous occasions, has violated that fundamental principle. You've made customers feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood, in a place they chose to spend their hard-earned money. Sir, please, David said, his voice breaking slightly. I can change. I can do better. This job, this restaurant, it means everything to me. Marcus studied him for a long moment. David, I believe that people can change, but only when they understand the full weight of their actions. You didn't just disrespect two customers tonight. You disrespected the values this restaurant was built on. The restaurant was so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. However, Marcus continued, I also believe in second chances, when they're genuinely deserved. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take a leave of absence. During that time, you're going to attend sensitivity training. You're going to work with a consultant on implicit bias. And you're going to think long and hard about whether this is really the career for you. David's relief was visible. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. If you come back, Marcus emphasized, it will be with a clear understanding that every guest who walks through that door deserves the same level of respect and service. There are no exceptions, no special categories, no judgments based on appearance. I understand completely. Marcus nodded to his assistant manager, who had been watching from near the kitchen. Jennifer, could you please take over for the evening? Jennifer stepped forward immediately. Of course, Mr. Thompson. And sir, I want to apologize for what happened tonight. This doesn't represent who we are as a team. I know it doesn't, Marcus said warmly, which is why I have confidence that we can address this and move forward. As David gathered his things and prepared to leave, he stopped in front of Marcus and Sarah one more time. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I am truly sorry. Not just because you're the owner, but because what I did was wrong. Period. Sarah spoke for the first time since her earlier question. David, apologies are important, but actions matter more. I hope you use this time to really examine why you made the assumptions you did. After David left, Marcus turned to address the restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Please continue enjoying your evening. As the normal rhythm of the restaurant gradually resumed, Jennifer approached their table. Mr. Thompson, your usual table is ready whenever you'd like to be seated. Marcus looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. Thank you, Jennifer. And could you please make sure the kitchen knows we're celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary? Absolutely. Chef Rodriguez will want to prepare something special. As they were escorted to their table, Marcus reflected on the evening's events. He'd bought this restaurant not just as a business investment, but as a way to create the kind of establishment he'd always wanted to see. A place where excellence in food and service existed alongside genuine hospitality and respect for all people. The incident with David had been disappointing, but it had also been educational. It showed him that good intentions weren't enough, that he needed to be more actively involved in ensuring his values were reflected throughout the organization. Over dinner, Sarah raised her wine glass. To 15 years of marriage, and to husbands who stand up for what's right. Marcus clinked his glass against hers. To wives who remind us that dignity and grace are always the right choice. 3 months later, David returned to Stella's. He'd completed his training, worked with counselors on understanding his biases, and spent time volunteering at community organizations. Most importantly, he'd done the hard work of examining his own prejudices and understanding how they'd affected his behavior. Marcus met with him privately before his first shift back. "How are you feeling, David?" "Nervous," David admitted, "but also grateful for the opportunity to prove that I've learned and grown." "What did you learn?" David took a deep breath. "I learned that I was letting my assumptions about people guide my actions, instead of treating everyone with the same respect. I learned that discrimination doesn't just hurt the people being discriminated against, it damages the entire community. And I learned that being in a position of authority means being responsible for creating an environment where everyone feels valued." Marcus nodded approvingly. "And what will you do differently?" "I'll treat every guest the same way I'd want to be treated. I'll check my assumptions at the door. And if I ever feel uncertain about how to handle a situation, I'll err on the side of inclusion and respect." "Good. Remember, David, this isn't just about avoiding another incident. It's about becoming the kind of leader who actively creates a welcoming environment for everyone." David's return to Stella's marked the beginning of a transformation in the restaurant's culture. Marcus instituted regular training sessions on unconscious bias and inclusive hospitality. He created channels for customers to provide feedback about their experiences. Most importantly, he made it clear that discrimination would not be tolerated at any level of the organization. 6 months later, Stella's had become known not just for its exceptional cuisine, but for its genuinely welcoming atmosphere. The restaurant received awards for inclusive hospitality, and customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Marcus often thought about that night when David had told him he didn't belong in his own restaurant. It had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had forced him to confront the reality that good intentions weren't enough, that creating truly inclusive spaces required constant vigilance and active leadership. The story became a reminder that assumptions based on appearance can be both wrong and harmful. David had looked at Marcus and seen only what his prejudices allowed him to see. He'd missed the intelligence, the business acumen, the years of experience, and the deep passion for hospitality that had made Marcus successful. But the story also showed that confronting discrimination with patience, clarity, and firm principles could create lasting change. Marcus hadn't responded with anger or immediate termination. He'd used the moment as an opportunity to educate, to clarify expectations, and to reinforce the values that should guide every interaction. In the end, Stella's became a better restaurant because someone had the courage to address its problems head-on. Marcus had proven that true ownership meant more than holding the deed. It meant taking responsibility for creating an environment where everyone could feel they belonged. The restaurateur who was told he didn't belong had shown that belonging isn't about permission from others. It's about having the strength to claim your space and the wisdom to ensure that space is welcoming to everyone who enters it. Never judge someone's worthiness based on appearance or assumptions. Never underestimate the power of principled leadership in addressing discrimination. And remember that the person you're trying to exclude might be the very person who has the power to teach you what true hospitality really means. Because sometimes the most important lessons about respect and inclusion happen not in classrooms or boardrooms, but in the everyday interactions that define who we are and what we stand for.